My mother kicked me out of the house saying, "Get out, you ungrateful girl." And 5 years later, she was the one calling me 47 times in a single day. I didn't even see the calls at first because my phone is always on silent. But honestly, it wouldn't have made a difference if I had. I probably would have ignored it anyway. My number probably wasn't even saved in her phone anymore. Or maybe it was. I don't know. What I do know is that when her name showed up on my screen again, it didn't feel like anything good was coming from it. Missed calls. One after the other. No pause. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, next to an open box I hadn't finished unpacking. Half-folded clothes, the smell of reheated food still in the air, the window open with street noise coming in. I remember my phone vibrating a few times, but I ignored it. Thought it was random group messages. Nothing important. When I finally picked it up, I stopped. 47 missed calls. All from her. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to understand what could possibly make my mother call me that many times after 5 years without speaking to me. Because it wasn't a quiet distance, it was a cut. Clean. And it wasn't my decision. My name is Tina Hargrove. I'm 28 years old, and the last time I was in that house was the day my mother told me to leave like I was a problem she needed to get rid of fast. Marlene, my mother, always had this habit of pushing responsibility onto other people. Like everyone around her was supposed to carry the weight she didn't want to deal with, especially when it came to taking care of her own mother. My grandmother Edith was already bedridden back then, fragile, dependent. And in reality, I was the one taking care of her. Always me, bathing her, medication, food, doctor visits, sleepless nights, everything. My mother said she had come back to help, but help, to her, always meant showing up when it was convenient and disappearing when it wasn't. And I stayed. I kept taking it on. Until the day it became too much. We argued in the living room, right in front of my grandmother. She raised her voice, didn't hesitate. "If it's so bad, then leave. Get out." The silence after that stayed in the air. Heavy, but clear. I grabbed my things without arguing, and I left. Didn't go back, didn't call, didn't look back, and now, 5 years later, 47 calls. I was still holding my phone when it buzzed again. Another call. From her. I didn't answer. This time because I chose not to. Because one thing was very clear in that moment. She wasn't calling because she missed me. If you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, and then suddenly needed like nothing happened, leave a like. Sometimes that's enough to remind you you're not imagining what you lived through. Because if she was calling me like that, something had changed. And this time, it wasn't her choice. I didn't return the call. Not that day. Not the next one either. I let the phone stay quiet, like it had been for 5 years. Because whatever was happening on her side, it wasn't urgent for me. But she kept trying. Not 47 times again. Just enough to make it obvious she was spiraling. Morning, late afternoon, past midnight. Always at strange hours, like she'd run out of patience and was calling whenever the panic hit. I didn't answer. Then the message came. "Where are you?" I stared at it for a second. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. That wasn't concern. That was control slipping. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, another one came in. "We need to talk." Need. That word looked strange coming from her. For 5 years, she didn't need to talk. Didn't need to check if I was alive. Didn't need to know where I was or how I was doing. But now she needed. I set the phone down and went to the kitchen for water, letting that sit in my head. Because the way she was reaching out didn't feel emotional. It felt practical, like something had slipped out of her hands. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered on the second ring. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then an older woman said, calm and careful, "Is this Tina Hargrove?" "Yes." "My name is Betty Klein. I live next door to your mother. That made me pay attention, not panic, just focus. She didn't ask me to call, Betty said, but I thought you should know. That stayed with me. Should know. Know what? I asked. There was a brief pause. Then she said it. The house isn't hers anymore. I went quiet for a second. Not because I didn't understand. Because I understood too fast. And right there something shifted in me. Because my grandmother had always been clear about one thing, even before she got too weak to say much. She noticed who stayed and who didn't. I thanked Betty and ended the call, but I didn't move right away. I just stood there in my kitchen, one hand still around the glass, staring at nothing for a few seconds. The house isn't hers anymore. That sentence stayed in my head. Not because it sounded impossible, because it didn't. My grandmother, Edith, had spent the last years of her life in that room by the window, too tired to say much some days, but never too far gone to understand what was happening around her. She saw who fed her, who cleaned her up, who stayed up through the bad nights. And she also saw my mother, coming in loud, leaving fast, acting involved whenever someone was looking. Back then, I wasn't thinking about wills or what would happen later. I was trying to get through mornings, medications, doctor visits, and nights that never seemed to end. But my grandmother noticed things I was too exhausted to name. That much, I knew. I picked my phone back up and looked at the missed calls again. 47 the first day. More after that. Messages getting shorter. Where are you? We need to talk. Not one apology. Not one soft word. Just urgency. And that told me enough. If my mother was calling like that, then she already knew. A few minutes later, Betty texted me an address and one line under it. Milton Stephen. Your grandmother trusted him. I read that twice. Then I sat down on the edge of the couch and looked around my apartment. Half unpacked boxes. A lamp I still hadn't fixed. Dishes in the sink. Quiet. Small. Mine. That mattered. Because the last time my mother told me to leave, she said it like I'd fall apart without that house. I didn't. I built a life anyway. Maybe not glamorous, maybe not easy. But mine. And now, out of nowhere, that same house was back in front of me again. Not as memory, as consequence. My phone lit up one more time while I was still sitting there. Her name. I watched it ring, then stop. And by then, I knew one thing for sure. She wasn't calling because she wanted me back. She was calling because she needed something from me now. I didn't call Milton that night. I waited until the next morning, when my head was clear and whatever panic my mother was drowning in had nowhere to land on me. His office was downtown, above a tax place and next to a travel agency with faded beach posters in the window. Nothing fancy. Honestly, that made me trust it more. When I gave my name to the receptionist, she looked up right away. Mr. Stephen is expecting you, she said, already standing. That got my attention. Expecting me. I followed her down a narrow hallway into a quiet office that smelled like paper, old wood, and coffee that had been sitting too long. Milton Stephen stood when I walked in. Older, calm, no rush in him. Ms. Hargrove, he said, shaking my hand. Please, sit. I sat. He didn't waste time. Your grandmother asked me to prepare certain documents before she passed, he said, opening a folder. She was very clear about what she wanted. That landed hard. Very clear. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers. The house was transferred to you properly and legally. There's no confusion there. I looked at him for a second. So my mother already knows? He gave a small nod. She knows the property is no longer hers to occupy. Occupy. That word mattered. He slid the paperwork toward me. My name. The address. Signatures. Dates. Real. Final. I stared at the page for a second, then looked back at him. What happens now? Milton folded his hands on the desk. If your mother refuses to leave, we proceed with removal. I nodded. No big reaction. No scene. Just that quiet feeling getting clearer. For the first time in years, it wasn't me being pushed out of that house. It was my mother being told she couldn't stay. I didn't go to the house right away. I took the papers home first. Left them on the table. Walked around my apartment for a bit like I needed to feel the space before stepping back into that one. Because that house wasn't just a place. It had weight. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Her. I let it ring once. Then I answered. "What do you want?" my mother said without even a hello. Hello? Same tone, same energy. 5 years later, nothing had softened. I leaned against the counter. "You called me." A short silence. Then she exhaled, irritated. "Don't play that game with me. You know exactly why I'm calling." I didn't rush to respond. "I actually don't," I said. That made her snap faster. "They're saying the house is in your name," she said, her voice louder now. "That there's paperwork. What did you do?" There it was. Not, "What happened?" "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, calm. "Grandma did." Another pause. Longer this time. "That doesn't make sense," she said, but it didn't sound certain. "She wouldn't." "She did," I cut in. Not loud, just enough. Silence again. I could almost hear her trying to rearrange the situation in her head. "This is my house," she said finally, her voice lower now, but steadier. "I've been here. I took care of her." I let that sit for a second. Then I said, "No, you didn't." Quiet. Direct. No emotion. And that hit harder than anything else I could have said. "You're really going to do this?" she asked, and there was something different in her voice now. It wasn't anger, not yet. Fear, just starting to show. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I just went to the lawyer." Another silence. Then sharper. "So what? You're just going to throw me out?" I didn't answer right away, because that felt too familiar. That sentence. Same position. Different side. "I didn't throw you out," I said. "You told me to leave." She didn't respond. And for a second, the line just stayed open. Then she said, lower this time, "That's not the same thing." I almost nodded to myself. It is now. Silence. Real silence. And that was the moment it shifted. Not officially. Not legally. But emotionally. Because for the first time, she understood she wasn't the one deciding how this was going to end. How many times has someone tried to rewrite the past the second they realized they were losing control? If you've ever had to choose between guilt and peace, subscribe. Because some people only start calling it unfair when the consequences finally land on them. And my mother was only starting to understand that this time, I wasn't the one leaving. I didn't go that same day. Not because I was hesitating. Because I wanted everything lined up before I stepped back onto that porch. Milton called the next morning. "I've prepared the notice," he said. "If she refuses to leave, we proceed with removal." I stood by the sink, looking out the window. "How long?" "A few days if she resists," he replied, then added, "Don't go alone." That part stayed. Around noon, Betty called. "You coming by?" she asked. "Soon." She lowered her voice a little. "She's been pacing all morning. Keeps checking the curtains like she's waiting for something to change." I let out a slow breath. "So she knows." "Oh, she knows," Betty said. "She just doesn't like that knowing didn't fix it." That landed deeper than I expected, because that was always her pattern. If she could see it, she thought she could control it. By late afternoon, I had the papers in my bag and my keys in my hand. I stood in my apartment for a second before leaving, looking around. The half-unpacked boxes, the quiet, the small things that took time to build. This life wasn't perfect. But it was mine. And I wasn't walking away from it this time. The drive felt shorter than I remembered. When I turned onto the street, The house looked exactly the same. Same porch, same windows, same worn-out paint trying to hold itself together. But it didn't feel the same. Because this time, I wasn't coming back to ask for space. I was coming back with my name already on it. I parked across the street and stayed in the car for a moment. Not long, just enough to look at the house without letting memory take over. Then my phone buzzed. Milton. "You there?" he asked. "Yeah." "Don't argue," he said. "Don't explain more than necessary. Let the paperwork speak." I kept my eyes on the porch. "That won't be her style." A short pause. "It doesn't have to be yours either." That was enough. I picked up the folder from the seat, stepped out of the car, and closed the door behind me. Then I started walking. Same path, same house, different position. Because the last time I stood in front of that door, I was being told to leave like I had nowhere else to go. This time, I was the one deciding who stayed. I stopped in front of the door. Not for long. Just enough to register the feeling. Same wood, same handle, same place I had walked out of with a bag in my hand and nowhere certain to go. I knocked once. Firm. I heard movement inside right away. Fast. Uneven. Then the lock turned. My mother opened the door like she had been standing right behind it. Eyes sharp. Hair pulled back in a rush. That same energy I remembered. Not calm, not grounded. Reactive. "So you finally decided to show up," she said. No hello. No pause. I looked at her for a second before answering. "You've been calling." She let out a short, irritated breath. "Don't do that. Don't act like you don't know what this is about." There it was. Same tone. Same need to control the direction. I didn't move from where I was. "I know what it's about," I said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." That hit. Not loudly, but enough. Her jaw tightened slightly. "They're saying the house isn't mine anymore." I nodded once. "It's not." Silence. Real silence this time. She looked at me like she was waiting for something else. A correction. A softer version. It didn't come. "That doesn't make sense," she said. But there was less force behind it now. "I've been here. I took care of everything." I held her gaze. "No," I said. "You didn't." That landed heavier. She shifted her weight, crossing her arms like she needed something to hold on to. "So what now?" she asked. "You just show up with papers and expect me to walk out?" I reached into my bag, pulled the folder out, and held it in front of me. "This is already done," I said. "I'm just giving you the chance to handle it without making it worse." Her eyes dropped to the folder for a second, then back to me. And I saw it. That first real crack. Not anger. Not yet. The moment where she realizes the situation isn't moving around her anymore. "You're serious," she said, quieter. "Yes." No explanation. No softening. Just that. The air between us shifted. Because for the first time since I had stepped onto that porch, she wasn't talking like she had control. She was trying to figure out what was left of it. She didn't step aside right away. That was the first resistance. Not loud, not dramatic, just her standing there, holding the doorway like that alone could slow things down. "You're not seriously doing this today," she said. I didn't move either. "It's already in motion," I answered. She shook her head like she could reject it just by refusing to accept the timing. "You can't just show up and decide this." "I didn't decide it today," I said. "Grandma did." That landed differently. Her expression shifted, just slightly. "She wouldn't," she started. "She did," I cut in, calm. That silence came back again. But this time, it wasn't just between us. It was in the house. Behind her. Around her. "You're twisting things," she said. But there was less certainty now. "You always do that." I let that pass, because that line didn't matter anymore. "I'm giving you time to pack," I said. "That's it." She laughed once, short and sharp. You think I'm just going to walk out of my own house because you showed up with a folder? I didn't answer right away. I just looked past her for a second. The hallway. The same one I used to walk through half asleep, carrying medication, checking on my grandmother in the middle of the night. Same walls, same space, different weight. It's not your house, I said. Quiet, direct. That was the one that hit. Her shoulders tensed, and for a second she looked like she was about to push back harder, but she didn't. Instead, she stepped back. Just one step. Not acceptance, but not refusal either. What happens if I don't leave? She asked. That was new. Not defiance. A question. We move forward, I said, and it won't be private anymore. That was enough. She looked at me for a long second, then turned away, walking back into the house without saying anything else. I stayed at the door for a second before stepping in, not rushing, not hesitating, just entering. And the moment my foot crossed that threshold, one thing became clear. I wasn't coming back into the same dynamic. This time, she was the one adjusting to me. She didn't argue after that, not right away. That was the strangest part. My mother had never been quiet when things didn't go her way. She usually pushed, talked over people, filled every space until the other person backed down first. But now, she just moved through the house without looking at me, opening drawers, closing them harder than necessary, pulling things out like she needed to prove something to herself. I stayed near the entrance, watching, not following, not interfering, just letting it happen. At one point, she turned toward me with a stack of clothes in her arms. You really think this makes you better than me? She said. This isn't about that, I answered. She gave a dry laugh. Of course it is. You've been waiting for this. I didn't respond. She went back to packing, faster now, rougher with everything she touched. What, you couldn't just leave things alone? She said. You had to come back and turn everything upside down. It was already upside down, I said. You just didn't notice. That made her stop for a second. Then she kept going. After that, time moved strangely. Not slow, not fast, just quiet. Bag by bag, drawer by drawer. The house looked less like hers with every minute. At some point, she walked past me with one of the bags and stopped at the door. You really don't care what happens to me after this, she said, lower this time. I looked at her. That didn't sound sharp anymore. It sounded tired. I care, I said. She turned slightly, like she hadn't expected that. But that doesn't change this. That was the truth. Not revenge, not punishment, just consequence. She stood there for a second longer, then opened the door and walked out with the bag in her hand. No shouting, no scene, just the sound of the door closing behind her. And for the first time in a long time, the house felt still. I didn't follow her outside. I didn't need to. The sound of the door closing was enough. I stood there for a few seconds, in the middle of the room, just looking around. Same walls, same floor, same house. But everything felt different. Not lighter. Clearer. There was no tension left in the air, no noise, no anticipation of what she would say next, what mood she would be in, what I would have to adjust to. Just silence. Real silence. I walked slowly through the house after that, not to check anything, not to inspect, just to be there. The hallway, the kitchen, the room where my grandmother used to stay by the window. I stopped there for a moment. Not emotional, just present. Because that was the last place I remembered feeling like I was doing something that mattered, even when no one else acknowledged it. And now, somehow, that had come back to me, not as memory, as ownership. A few days later, everything was finalized. Clean, legal, done. My mother didn't come back. She tried to call once. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to say. Weeks passed, and I started making changes to the house, Not to erase anything, to repurpose it. Rooms opened up. Furniture shifted. The space started to breathe in a different way. Eventually, I turned it into something that made sense for me. A small guest house. 8 rooms. Simple, clean, by the water. People came and went. Summer filled the place faster than I expected. Conversations in the hallway, luggage rolling across the floor, doors opening and closing without tension attached to them. It felt alive again. At some point, I named it Grandma's Waves, because if anyone had earned that space, it was her. Months later, my mother showed up once. No warning, no performance, just standing outside. "I need a place to stay," she said. I looked at her for a second. Then I nodded toward the sign. "We have rooms available." She understood. And that was enough. She didn't come back after that. And I didn't reach out. Because some distances aren't built out of anger. They're built out of clarity. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who thought you would always stay, subscribe. Because some people only learn your value when they lose access to you. And sometimes, the only way to end a cycle is to stop stepping back into it.